Good day, everyone. So we are the group 1, and let me first introduce myself. My name is Angela, and I am together with my co-members, which is Abby, Amara, I, and Ira. And today, in this video, we are going to talk about the one of the popular ethical theory that is most commonly used in politics or government settings, and which is as shown in the screen is utilitarianism. So of course, when we talk about utilitarianism, you will get to know the definition of it, and of course those important key thinkers behind this theory, and of course the application and the critics of this theory, and lastly, the comparison of this theory.
Utilitarianism is a way of thinking about what is right and wrong by focusing on the results of actions. It says the best action is the one that creates the most happiness or benefits the most people. And this idea became popular in the 19th century, credited by the philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Mill. Its straightforward goal of maximizing well-being makes it easy to apply to real-life situations like making decisions in government, healthcare, or daily life. And the theory stands out because it focuses on the effects of actions rather than why someone did something or if it follows strict rules. For example, a choice is considered good if it helps the most people, even if the reasons behind it aren't perfect or good, and this focus on results makes utilitarianism a flexible way to handle tricky ethical problems, especially when it's hard to balance different needs. And what makes utilitarianism unique is that it treats everyone's happiness equally. Unlike selfish approaches that only focus on personal gain, it asks people to think about the bigger picture and what's best for everyone. By promoting fairness and equality, utilitarianism stays useful today, helping people tackle tough questions like how to share resources, make laws, or address global issues. So it has 3 principles. Number 1 is pleasure or happiness is the only thing that has intrinsic value. So it means that pleasure or happiness is valuable all by itself. It is good simply because it is, and other things are only valuable if they help us achieve happiness, like tools that help us reach a goal. For example, helping someone in need. If you help someone and feel good because you made their day better, that positive feeling is intrinsically valuable. It is not dependent on whether it brings you material rewards or recognition. And number 2 is actions are right if they promote happiness and wrong if they promote unhappiness. So it means that if something makes people happy, it is the right thing to do, and if it causes unhappiness, it is wrong. And this idea focuses on creating the most happiness for the most people, no matter why someone does it. So for example, breaking a promise for selfish reasons. It is wrong action because you cancel plans with your friend last minute to do something you prefer, so you disappoint your friend. So why it is wrong? Because it causes unhappiness for your friend while prioritizing your own short-term desires. So lastly is everyone's happiness counts equally. So it means that every person's happiness matters the same. And this idea was revolutionary when Jeremy Bentham proposed it because it rejected the belief that some lives, like the wealthy or powerful, were more important than others. Instead, it calls for fair laws that help everyone, not just a privileged few. So for example, healthcare for all. A government introduced universal healthcare to ensure everyone, rich or poor, has access to medical treatment. So why it fits? Because it treats everyone's health and well-being as equally valuable, regardless of social financial status.
Jeremy Bentham was an English philosopher, jurist, and social reformer best known as the founder of utilitarianism. His central idea was that the moral worth of an action is determined by its outcome, specifically, its ability to produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. This principle is often summarized as the greatest happiness principle. So, act utilitarianism is sometimes called quantitative utilitarianism. It's called quantitative utilitarianism because it's about quantifying happiness. Means adding up all the happiness and subtract the pain, and then deciding to act based on number. So Bentham provides the philosophic or hedonic calculus as a way to calculate utility in this way. Take note that quantitative utilitarianism would agree that the morally good action is the one that maximizes happiness. So going back to hedonic calculus, it is a method developed by Bentham to quantify and evaluate pleasure and pain. It's a way to determine the moral rightness of an action by calculating the overall happiness or unhappiness it produces. You can assess an action by evaluating it against 7 factors, each related to the intensity of pleasure or pain it might cause. First, we have intensity. It answers the questions, how strong is the pleasure or pain? Second is duration. How long will the pleasure or pain last? Third, certainty. How likely is the pleasure or pain to occur? Fourth, proximity. How soon will the pleasure or pain happen? Fifth, fecundity. The chance that the action will lead to further pleasure or pain. Sixth, purity. Will the action produce a pure form of pleasure or a mixed result? Seventh, extent. How many people will be affected by the pleasure or pain? So by evaluating the action through these 7 factors, you can calculate the overall amount of happiness or suffering it might cause and use that to guide ethical decisions. If the benefits or the pleasure outweigh the cost or pain, the action is considered morally right and vice versa. So moving to principle of utility, central to the utilitarianism is the ethical idea that the best action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number. It emphasizes the consequences of an action rather than the intentions behind them. According to this principle, an action is morally right if it leads to more overall pleasure or well-being, and wrong if it causes more pain or suffering. The principle seeks to maximize the overall good, considering all affected individuals, and often requires balancing competing interests to achieve the most beneficial outcome. At its core, the principle of utility offers a pragmatic approach to ethical decision-making. It is a form of consequentialism where the morality of an action is determined solely by its outcome. While it aims to promote happiness and reduce suffering, critics argue that it can sometimes justify harmful action if they lead to greater overall good, potentially overlooking individuals' right or justice. Nevertheless, the principle of utility remains a foundational idea in ethics, influencing debates on social, political, and moral issues. Lastly, nature of governance. So in utilitarianism, the nature of governance is focused on maximizing the greatest good for the greatest number, meaning that the government's primary objective should be to enact policies and laws that produces the most overall happiness and well-being for the entire population, considering the interest of all individuals equally, even if it means sacrificing some individual benefits for the greatest social good. Essentially, the government should strive to create the most beneficial outcomes for the majority, as judged by utilitarian calculus of pleasure and pain.
So, good afternoon everyone. Today I will be discussing the contributions of John Stuart Mill to utilitarianism. So, one of the most influential theory way back then, ethical theory way back then. So, first, sino nga ba si John Stuart Mill? So, he is a British philosopher, economist, and also political thinker. He was a key figure in the development of utilitarianism, building on the idea of Jeremy Bentham. Well, si Bentham, nakafocus siya sa principle of the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Si Mill, nirefine niya yung idea na to and address its limitations. That's why the first one is refining Bentham's utilitarianism. So si John Stuart Mill built upon Jeremy Bentham's idea. Si Bentham believed in quantitative hedonism, meaning that happiness should be measured by its amount. However, si Mill, he argued that some pleasures are higher than others. That's why he created two types of pleasure. First one is higher pleasure, na nakafocus siya sa intellectual and moral pleasure ng isang tao. Si lower pleasure naman, mas na-emphasize niya dito yung basic or the physical needs or pleasure ng isang tao. So, this theory was the most important contribution by Mill between the higher and lower pleasure. He argued that not all pleasure are equal, unlike kay Bentham, who believed that pleasure should be measured by only in terms of quantity. Si Mill, ini-emphasize niya yung quality, yung quality ng happiness na madadala nito for the individuals. He stated that, intellectual and moral pleasures such as, for example, reading, studying philosophy, creating arts, are superior to physical pleasure. As he famous said na it is better to be a human being satisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Tinawag niya pa yung theory ni Bentham na pig philosophy kasi mas nakafocus siya sa basic needs or the physical needs ng isang tao. So, the meaning ng sinabi niya, it's better to be experience meaningful struggles than to live in ignorance. For example, kung ano yung ginagawa natin ngayon, like for example, studying to be a nurse someday, yung meaningful struggles na nangyayari sa atin ngayon, mas grabe yung happiness na maidudulot niyan once na nakagraduate tayo or maging nurse tayo someday. Parang long-term happiness yan. The second one is the harm principle in individual freedom. So Mill introduced the harm principle, so which states that people should be free to act as they wish, as long as their actions do not harm other individual. So this was a major shift from Bentham's approach, as Mill believed that individual liberty and human rights should be protected. So his idea influenced modern democracy and also freedom of speech and personal autonomy. Naglabas din siya ng state na the only reason to limit a person's freedom is to prevent harm to others. So this means people should have the freedom to think, to speak, and also to act as they wish, as long as they do not harm others. So Mill believed that freedom leads to progress and the societies flourish when people express their ideas. The third one is rule of utilitarianism, following moral principles. So, unlike kay Bentham, mas pinopromote niya or na-emphasize niya yung act of utilitarianism, where each action is judged separately. Kay Mill, dinevelop niya yung rule of utilitarianism. He argued that, moral rules should have be established based on what generally promotes the greatest happiness. So this means that we should follow rules that have been proven to benefit society, rather than calculating the consequences of every single action. For example na lang, like pagiging honest natin as an individual, to your family, to your friends, to your teacher, to your study, yan. Second one is treating others with kindness, and also respecting justice and fairness. So these rules provide, stability and also the fairness in society, ensuring long-term happiness for everyone. Of course, pag mas genuine yung pinakita mong actions, para lang makamit yung happiness na gusto mo, na gusto ng society, of course, mas maganda yung happiness na makukuha mo, walang any doubts, ganyan. The fourth one is advocating for equal rights. So si Mill was also a strong supporter of human rights, particularly in women's rights. So in his book, The Subjection of Women, he argued two things. First one is women should have the same educational and professional opportunities as men. So way back then, alam naman natin na may discrimination ang nagaganap between women and men. And the second one is gender equality would lead to a happier and more progressive society. So this idea, help the modern democratic values. And nakapaloob dito yung moral obligation and justice. So Mill will also integrated justice into utilitarianism. He argued that justice is essential to happiness and that fairness, equality, and the rights must be considered when making moral decisions. So he believed that utilitarianism should not only focus on maximizing the pleasure, but also ensuring the fairness, the protection for all individuals.
On December 8, 2020, at University Hospital in Coventry, England, May Parsons administered the free Pfizer BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine to Margaret Keenan, a 19-year-old woman. This historic moment marked the start of global vaccination campaigns representing hope in the fight against a virus that had caused immense suffering and loss. This decision is a clear example of utilitarianism because it prioritizes the greatest good for the greatest number. By vaccinating the elderly and other high-risk groups first, the policy saved the most lives and reduced strain on the healthcare system, benefiting society as a whole. While younger individuals had to wait longer, this short-term disadvantage has outweighed by the long-term benefits of fewer deaths and a more stable healthcare system. They focus on maximizing well-being and minimizing harm, even with difficult trade-offs, reflects the core principles of utilitarianism. May Parsons' administration of the first COVID-19 vaccine symbolizes not only a scientific milestone, but also an ethical journey. The dilemmas raised during the vaccine rollout highlight the complexity of decision-making in a global crisis. By applying the principles of utilitarianism, leaders prioritize actions that maximize well-being and minimize harm for the greatest number of people. The first example that can be applied to utilitarianism is the trolley problem, a classic ethical thought experiment introduced by British philosopher Philip Foot in 1967. This is used by philosophers and psychologists to explore moral dilemmas, and it has been presented in many variations. So yung scenario na to is meron maparting na trend and merong 5 person na nakatali sa riles. And sa kabilang side naman ay meron 1 person only and nakatali rin siya. So kapag pinal mo yung lever, ang sasagasaan is yung 5 person. So yung maliligtas syempre yung isang tao na nakatali sa trend sa riles. And so sa trolley problem, wala siyang definite answer because it presents a moral dilemma where different ethical perspectives lead to conflicting conclusions. It forces individuals to weigh the value of one life against many, challenging notions of fairness, responsibility, and morality. Some people may prioritize saving the most lives, while others reject the idea of directly causing harm, making it impossible to identify a universally correct choice. The problem is closely related to utilitarianism because it highlights the ethical principle of maximizing overall well-being. A utilitarian would argue for sacrificing one person to save 5, as it produces the greatest net benefit. However, the discomfort and moral complexity of this decision also demonstrate the challenges of applying utilitarianism to real-life dilemmas. So, in different ethical theories provide different perspectives on this problem. So, guys, had deontology, and it argues that certain actions are morally wrong regardless of their consequences. So, a deontologist might say that actively choosing to kill someone, even to save more lives, is unethical because it treats the individual as a means to an end rather than as an autonomous person with rights. So, in conclusion, the trolley problem is a strong example of utilitarianism because it maximizing because it highlights the core principle of maximizing overall happiness and minimizing harm. So by choosing to sacrifice one person to save five, a utilitarian focuses on the outcome that benefits the greatest number of people. This approach reflects the essence of utilitarian ethics, which prioritize the greater good over individual harm. Even in difficult and morally uncomfortable situations, the problem effectively illustrates how utilitarianism values the overall well-being of society and provides a framework for making tough ethical decisions based on consequences.
Now, let's talk about some of the critics regarding this ethical theory, which is utilitarianism. In Immanuel Kant's point, inaargue niya na itong view ni Mill kasi nga ang view niya, which is deontology, it says na nothing is above the law. So, imbes na mag-focus sa moral duty, itong utilitarianism ay yung mga actions na often driven by self-interest and outcomes. Kasi nga, di ba, as mentioned kanina, utilitarianism is focused on the outcomes as the key to morality. Pero iba yung view ni Kant, which is dun siya nagpo-focus sa intentions, ang key to morality. Ngayon, let's move on dito naman kay John Rawls, which is one of the key people on contractualism theory. So, this one, I have read this sa analysis paper ni Mitra about sa utilitarianism. And meron siyang nabanggit dito na kinikriticize ni John Rawls itong moral philosophy ni Mill kasi nga para sa kanya it does not set an unrealistically high standard for humanity. And the writer of this analysis paper support this critique since nagda-doubt siya. And also the other people ay nagda-doubt sa pagka-optimistic ni Mill sa human nature. Specifically yung general good for greater people na view niya sa human nature. But in Mill's defense is that morality aims to move from what is to what ought to be. No? He acknowledges that moral progress depends on improving individual character and circumstances without ignoring people's real capacities. So, sa madaling salita, gusto ni Mill na i-maximize natin yung utility natin by focusing on our personal growth, no? Pero ayun nga, no? Some interpret this as selfish because itong view na to is sinasabi na dun tayo kung saan may greater pleasure, di ba? Dun tayo kung saan may greater happiness, kung saan yung mas magiging contenta tayo. Pero, ayun, no? With this view, no, na kung dun tayo papalay sa greater pleasure, no? And bahala na yung maapektuhan negatively. So, yun yung parang minimin neto. So, ayan, no? Despite these critics, no, humans, of course, still tends to often struggle with morality since nagko-contradict in between sa desire ng bawat isa, di ba? So, ayan nga, no, despite sa mga critics, no, utilitarianism is still being used nowadays, especially in government settings.
So let's compare consequentialism and deontology. But first of all, why do we need to compare them? So the reason why we need to compare them is because they offer two very different ways of thinking about what is right or wrong. For consequentialism, it says that the rightness of an action depends on its results. Good consequences make an action right, and bad consequences make it wrong. On the other hand, deontology focuses on rules and duties, arguing that some actions are always right or wrong, no matter what the outcomes are. It's so important to compare these two because both have their strengths and weaknesses. So by looking at them side by side, we can better understand how they work in real life situations. One big criticism of consequentialism, especially from the ontologists, is that it could justify doing morally wrong things if they lead to good result. For example, a consequentialist might say it's okay to kill one innocent person if it saves many others, but the ontologists would argue that killing an innocent person is always wrong, no matter what the outcome is. Comparing the two helps us think more carefully about what is really the best way to make ethical decisions.
And that wraps up our presentation about utilitarianism. So here are the reliable sources that we use as a reference, so you can check it out. So that's all. Thank you for listening.